Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another episode of First Impressions, the video series where I discuss films, either ones that I've been meaning to see for a while, or ones that are still in their theatrical run. Today's episode is one of the latter. It is, of course, the sequel to the 2012 film Prometheus, and another prequel to the 1970s sci-fi horror classic Alien, Alien Covenant. Like the classic film in Prometheus, it is directed by Ridley Scott. The screenwriters are Dante Harper and John Logan, who the latter actually does have a bunch of great films under his belt. Gladiator, The Last Samurai, Sweeney Todd, Spectre, and he is also the creator of the show Penny Dreadful, which when I found out this is the guy writing, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I found out after I saw the film, by the way, so I was like looking at him like, a couple films I like. I'm like, I can sort of see his handiwork in here. But the other writer probably also is partially responsible for what we see on screen. Now, before I get too involved in the review, I will say, at the end of the day, I like the film. It's not a perfect film, not as good as a classic film or its 80s sequel Aliens. I liked it about as much as Prometheus, maybe a tad more, except for a couple minor things. I'd say it's probably going to be about as polarizing as Prometheus was. And before I get too far into things, the synopsis of the film is that it takes place about 10 years after Prometheus. We start aboard the ship Covenant, so that explains why there's Covenant in the title of the film. We meet all of our characters at the beginning. First, we meet Walter, who is the synthetic on board the Covenant. He's doing the same kind of stuff that David was doing at the beginning of Prometheus, walking around the ship, checking vitals, checking other stuff. And he's recharging the ship, because I guess every now and then they have to stop out of whatever type of propulsion they're using and recharge with solar energy. Which this was a nice little sci-fi thing to see. We'd see the foil sail come out to recharge the solar energy. Well, as they're doing this, a neutrino burst hits, which really is a bad thing because it sends the system into overdrive and the system basically freaks out. Now, he has to wake up the crew, and in the process of this, James Franco's character, who is the current captain of the ship, dies. Which I have to say, well played, movie. You had the balls to kill off James Franco this early in the film. Well played. Granted, it is kind of a waste of his talents because he doesn't even get to say a word. All he is just sitting there like in his thing, like, what the fuck? Ah, I'm burning! That's all he does in the final film. Now, in the prequel little short films that they shot, he actually is used. So it's one of those things like, they killed off a very high-profile actor, but then they wasted his talent. So it's kind of a balance there. I mean, some people say that Mickey Rourke was wasted in Iron Man 2, but at least he was utilized more in that film, and he was actually in a lot of the film throughout the whole running course of the film, unlike James Franco here. But his death basically is a catalyst at the beginning, and we get a new captain, played by Billy Crudup, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Outside of this film, he's probably best known for playing Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen, in which I didn't even realize that was him. Watching him, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Dr. Manhattan versus aliens? That'd be a good little concept for a film, actually. After the captain's death and funeral, the crew is all getting the ship repaired, where they come across a distress beacon once they're fixing the foil thing. Because apparently they didn't catch it because, I guess, of a shielding around the ship that, I guess, was there to prevent transmissions like this from hitting them, which is a little weird, but considering that they are a colonization mission, not a rescue mission or like an alien, a refinery mission. I can see why they don't want to have any stray transmissions hit them to where they have to go off course and ruin their whole trajectory. Well, they find out that the planet that it's coming from is habitable, and they're like, how did we miss this? It's closer than the planet they're going to, which will take them 7 years to get, whereas this planet will just take them a couple weeks, so they switch course to go there. Now, of course, our lead female, Daniels, played by Catherine Waterston, is a little skeptical about this, like, what are the odds of us finding us here? But the captain's like, I never said we're going to alter our course and stay there. Even though you can tell that's what he wants to do. But he at least says, in the name of science, we should at least go and check it out. Which I know somebody's going to say, oh, that's a stupid decision right there. But even in their shoes, it's a scientific exploration. You at least got to check it out. And of course, we, the audience, already have an idea of what's going to be there, but the characters themselves do not. So I'm not going to hold it against them. Now, they get there, and they land, and the little ship that they're going through is kind of battered by the storm, but it's not, wrecked, kind of like how the Nostromo was in the first film. Anyway, they get out, and we get those scenes we see in the trailer where they're exploring the ground like wheat. What are the odds of finding human vegetation this far from Earth? Now, they split into three groups. We got one female, who is Danny McBride's character's wife, stay on the ship. We have two characters that stay by themselves. One of them is the wife of the captain, and she's collecting samples for use back in the lab later. And the rest of the group continue on, and they eventually find the wreck of the one engineer ship from the end of Prometheus. They go inside, and they don't find facehuggers in there. I'm just going to let you know right now, they're not in there. Now, in the course of all this, two crew members are infected by spores. One of them is in the bigger group, and the other one is the guard for the captain's wife. Now, the spores, it seems, are connected to the black goo, because I guess when it was sent, all of it was sent into the atmosphere of the planet, which you find out is actually what happened later. A lot of weird stuff happened, because the black goo is very versatile. It seems it mutates a lot of stuff, and I guess some of it was remaining dormant on the planet in the moment a life form that was an actual animal came. Because one thing we find out is it doesn't impact vegetation, it only impacts biological life that is, animal. The two get infected, and they become necromorphs, which I guess are another step in the process from what we saw in Prometheus towards the final xenomorph. At the end of Prometheus, we saw the Deacon, which I called the proto-alien at the time. Here we see the necromorph, which is a little bit, it's a step up from the Deacon design, but still not total xenomorph. They still have the acid blood, and it gives them a little bit of a run of its money. They kill one, but the other one escapes and shows up again later. Now, in the process of fighting, they run into David, who takes them back to his little castle place, which from the get-go you can tell is like a weird thing because there's a lot of bodies on the outside. Which this is one thing I guess some people have been complaining about is, like, why don't they see something's up with him? Who's to say they don't? They're just not going to say anything out loud because this guy just saved them, and they're at least going to give him the benefit of the doubt. But you could tell that as they find out more stuff that happens to him, that they see, okay, there was really this. That explains a lot. Walter even confronts David at one point about it. It's like, they didn't break in the crash, did they? And now that's all the main plot I'm going to give in this synopsis. Some other plot points I'll probably talk about it as I dissect the film, but in the last half of the film is when we get our Xeno action, which that's going to probably disappoint some people that the Xenomorphs themselves do not show up until the third act of the film, when the film was called Alien Covenant. As the film was going on, I'm like, okay, I guess they're not going to show up to the third act, which didn't bug me, but it was kind of annoying. It's like, really? You market the film as Alien, and the aliens are not even in the film? I mean, they didn't show up as much in the first two films, but you at least felt their presence throughout most of the film, so it actually deserved the title Alien and Aliens. Here, Alien is just slapped on the film for marketing. They should have just called the film Covenant, marketed it as a sequel to Prometheus and another prequel to Alien, and left it at that, because the title Covenant just would make a better move. Like some of the little plot points with the film, I think that calling it Alien Covenant was a reaction to some of the criticism on Prometheus that some people had. Mainly because it's like, it's a prequel to Alien, and yet you know aliens in it. Where are the aliens? You didn't need aliens in Prometheus, I'm going to say that. Yeah, having the proto one at the end was nice, but it was a story about the engineers slash space jockeys. You didn't really need them. But I guess some people didn't expect that with Prometheus, and this is how this film kind of turned out is the result we got from that. Whether you like it or hate it, good or ill, that's what happened. That's probably a good example of why you shouldn't always react to the negative criticism you get, because sometimes it could make things on par with what they were criticizing, or a little bit worse, because I'd say that just from the title, the whole situation is worse than what they do with Prometheus. And if you were expecting more aliens, it is going to disappoint you a lot. Like I said, I'm disappointed by it, but I don't hate the film over it. It's just a little thing like, really, Fox? Really? Now, one thing I will kind of agree with, one of the criticisms I've heard, is that the captain makes a stupid decision. I know some people will expand it to other characters, but I'd say the captain's decision is the one stupid decision that's made throughout the film. Now, people complained about some of the stupid decisions they made in Prometheus. With, yeah, okay, there were some stupid decisions there, but they at least had reasons that made a little sense, like the navigator getting lost. There was a storm outside that as we saw, interfered with a lot of the equipment. Of course, he'd probably get lost. Now, it doesn't excuse the fact that those two left before the rest of the group, and he somehow got turned around, but I don't know, maybe they're exploring somewhere. I don't know. Watch the film again, see if I can think of another reason, or just say they're idiots. Leave it at that. Makes me think of a line my supervisor said. Just because they're this is a paraphrase of what he said, by the way. Just because they're book smart doesn't mean they're street smart. that kind of vibe. They might be book smart, doesn't mean they have a lot of logical sense about them. But you know, it's kind of bad considering they're scientists out in space. But as Ron White said, you can't fix stupid. There's not a pill you can take. Stupid is forever. Nice little tie into this is the captain makes a stupid decision of going off with David when he finds out about the guy, and goes into the room where we see he's been making some experiments, and we find the eggs with the facehuggers in them. Now, the stupid decision he makes here is, I would say, is not that he goes with them, because he could be going with them just to see what's up, and then, you know, leave it to go relay this information to the others and decide, okay, we gotta get the hell out of here. That would have been smarter for him to, like, tell him, like, hey, if I don't show up in about 10 minutes, send a search. All of you guys get the heck out of here. That would have been a bit smarter, but, you know, with how the character is with this whole, you know, religious aspect, saying stuff like, "Oh, ye of little faith," I could sort of see why he wouldn't send a message, because even though he's seen this stuff from David, part of him might still have a little bit of hope and trust in the character, which of course turns out to be bad on his part. But now he goes in there, and the stupid decision I'll say he makes is that he actually looks inside the egg. Now, we the audience know why that's a bad idea, because it's like, oh, no. And actually got a little bit of a laugh out of the audience with it, which I think is intentional, because we the audience are already familiar with it. So we're like, you stupid idiot. It's not like an Alien, where at the time you first watch the film, you don't know, and you're like, okay, he's looking in, I might not be, they see like, bad idea. Now, the character should not have peeked in there at all, because even if he was giving David the benefit of the doubt, it's like, why trust him there? I mean, David is really luring him in there, but you shouldn't trust the guy after you saw him trying to talk to a necromorph. At least not to that level, but I guess the guy's really that trusting, that naive about this sort of thing, and yet he's a captain. I guess it's stuff like this is the reason why they mentioned earlier he wasn't made the captain to begin with. Well, he's dead now. Which, this kind of goes into another little criticism I noticed before the film was even over, and that is, the incubation time for the aliens is very fast. It seems there's like at least 2 in the film, and their incubation time goes like that. Like, if you remember AVP, it's like that fast. And these are supposed to be the original xenomorphs. I know David's been tinkering with them, but it shouldn't be that fast. Then again, the incubation time always seems to be a bit finicky past the first couple films, mainly just to speed up the plot. But at least in AVP and even in Resurrection, there is at least a genetic reason for why the xenomorph life cycle is faster. Because of the genetic crossing with Resurrection, it's because they're not full xenos, they're xeno-human hybrids. Even more so than what a xenomorph spawned in a human is. And of course, in AVP, obviously, predators don't have a lot of time to wait for incubation periods, so they speed it up. Which is a little weird, because, like, where's it getting the nutrients from? But I guess you could say it just steals more from the human host faster, so even if they got the xenomorph out of them, they die anyway. Just it comes off as weird when it's this early in the timeline. It's supposed to be these xenos. I mean, even if you say that David didn't mess with them to speed it up a little bit at first, it's like, okay. Speaking of which, that's the thing that I know is going to polarize a lot of fans, and that is that this is a mild retcon. The reason I say mild is because in the previous films we never got an answer one way or another. Closest was Prometheus, and that was the whole black goo thing with the engineers and then seeing the deacon. But here, the retcon is that David is the one who created the xenomorphs through all of his genetic experimentation with the black goo created by the engineers. Now, I know, like I said, a lot of fans are not going to like this. Me, I'm not entirely sure what side of the fence I sit on, but I'm leaning more towards not having a big problem with it. Now, like I said, it does retcon the previous thing of maybe them just being a weird creature that the space jockey / engineers found, or maybe something they created inadvertently through their experimentation with the black goo. Well, you could still go that angle and just say that David managed to recreate it, or fine-tune it past what the engineers had done, but you'd have to find that out in another sequel, and they never stated in this film, so. Now, with David's character, he has changed from how he was in the first film. In the first film, he was kind of a little bit, he was a little innocent. Now, the reason I say that is most of the stuff he did was at the behest of Wayland. And like even when he put the black goo in the guy's drink, he waited until he technically asked for permission. He wasn't malevolent. It's not like he went for science. They handed him the drink. He's like, "Oh, would you do anything?" Then he put it in there. Even though that's one of the idiot thing with them. You think like, you just put your finger in my drink. The guy's probably drunk, so he's not going to notice. At least that's the way I look at it. doesn't see it out of his peripheral, and he's kind of drunk, so they're like, probably sees it blurred. But anyway, get back to this one. He is now a malevolent being, in that he's basically like that whole old school mad scientist thing, that anything in the name of science and screw everything else. And what's happened, I can sort of see that happening. And they actually give a scene at the beginning of the film that sets up this character change, and that is a little conversation with Wayland where he talks about the creators and all that, and based on Wayland's answer, you could sort of see why David goes down this path. Which leads to, I thought of this before I went to bed last night, the thematic element you can get out of this little character change, and also David being the one that created the xenomorphs. Whereas Prometheus was about humans meeting their creators, man meeting the gods and finding out they're not really gods in the true sense. Whereas this film is about one supplanting their creator and becoming the gods themselves. And what makes it work a little bit more for me is that instead of a human supplanting the engineer to become the god, we have a creation of the human, a synthetic, supplanting both its creator and its creator's creator to become a god, in a sense. In the sense that he's becoming a god of creation. He's creating all these things. So, as they said in the original Frankenstein, in the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be a god. And that's kind of gone to David's head, and he basically now has zero empathy for life. Except for maybe Shaw, but even then, he kind of... I'm not going to go there, because I actually wanted to be surprised for those who actually do have interest in seeing the film. But you could tell just from the get-go that he has no empathy for life. And this carries over into the ending, which the ending is bittersweet and slightly downbeat, but I kind of saw it coming, and it didn't bother me, especially since you can't really have these characters survive and then go into Alien. Well, technically, you could have had them survive and then just had them send the word, and maybe the company got a hold of that and like, oh, there's some more creatures out there. We should send some stuff. And then, put it in the log and like be one of the long list of evidence that they find about the creatures until the first alien. And then you just have that colony just disappear, and no one gets word of it until years after Alien, and Aliens like, you guys actually encountered those creatures again? Oh, frick. That would have been a good way to end it, but no, they went with David basically taking control of the colony, and he's going to continue his experimentation. Which is a sequel-bait ending, a little bit more so than the ending of Prometheus, but it could carry on into a third film, and I think if they're going to do another prequel, the third film should be the last prequel they do. And that one should properly end with a lead-in into Alien. Now, I know we really only needed one prequel. Some will say we didn't need prequels at all, but if you're going to do a trilogy, the last one should definitely be the lead into Alien. And if you're going to put Alien in the title, have aliens have more of a part in the plot. If not, just call it by whatever the name of the ship involved with the film is, or if it's going to be about Paradise or what, just go with that. One question from Prometheus that isn't answered is why the engineers hate us. It's not answered. David doesn't even give an answer or even say, yeah, to me it doesn't even matter. Now we see more engineers, and they look a little bit less, they look a little bit more alive than the engineer we saw in Prometheus. And they also look like their technology has regressed a little bit, but it's been 2,000 years, a lot could happen in 2,000 years, energy crisis to where they have to regress to medieval-esque technology. I mean, they do have some technology, but they're all dressed in robes and all that, but that could just be the fashion sense. And this is only in the scene where David basically wipes them out, but no sense of it. But I can sort of see David's justification for doing that. It's like, you're going to wipe out humanity, I'm going to wipe out you. It basically makes him feel more like a god, so it's the beginning of his god complex. Now, the score was composed by Jed Kurzel, who also did the scores for The Babadook, the 2015 Macbeth film, and Assassin's Creed. Those are his other big ones. His score is pretty decent. It does have a lot of callbacks to the score from Alien, which is probably my only little nitpick about the score for Prometheus, is that they didn't even have a small callback to it. Not even in the end credits. At least Casino Royale, the reboot of the James Bond franchise, had a callback to the main Bond theme in the end credits. But, no. It does have a callback to the main theme of Prometheus a couple times, though, even within the film, where I guess in the filmed universe it's a score that David composed for Shaw's Elegy. And the original score was decent, but the parts I remember is mainly the callbacks to the Alien score, but that's because everyone remembers the Alien score. That main theme that Jerry Goldsmith composed. Makes me wonder how the score would sound if Goldsmith was still alive and he composed it, but That's a big what if. He probably wouldn't have done it because of his little disagreement with Scott over the first film. But it's a decent score. The acting from all the actors I thought was pretty good. Whether you like how their characters are written or not, that's a different story. But the acting I thought was pretty good. Catherine Waterston as Daniels, I think she did a good job now. And some of the action scenes that some people might question is like not really believable because it's a little different than Ripley in Aliens or even the Colonial Marines and other characters. But she's kind of a blue-collar character. It'd be like if you were to take Ripley from the first Alien and put her into the same scenario from Aliens. It's not going to be the exact same. And I really bought her as a blue-collar female put in a situation like this. And by the end of it, she's like, I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore. And all the characters are kind of like that by the end. Even McBride's character, you get that vibe in the third act near the end when they're dealing with the alien on board their ship. Which is where we get that one scene from the trailer where we see the alien tail come up. It was definitely a callback to the one fan theory about what happens to Lambert because of how her death scene is edited. I think a lot of people probably already know what I'm talking about, so I don't have to state it. Damien Bicker, Nathaniel Dean, they do good jobs for the Sergeant characters, which, by the way, their characters are the gay couple characters, which not really made a big deal of in the final film, but you can kind of tell that's what they are. Which, one thing I will mention is that I know some of my friends were talking about this before the film came out. I was like, if they're going on a colonization mission, why would they have a gay couple? Well, the gay couple are part of the crew. And there's 2,000 other colonists on board the ship and a lot of embryos, so see, with the embryos, you can have a gay couple on board the ship and don't have to worry about that because they can have a child through the embryos. And of course, Michael Fassbender, he does a good acting job, and he probably had the most difficult acting experience on the film just from the fact that there's a lot of scenes where he's talking off himself. So there's probably some days where he filmed one part of the conversation with staying in and went and filmed the other part. And probably the most difficult part is when the androids fight. I'm not going to spoil the context of what happens, but based on what I've already said about David, you can kind of guess what leads into it. And that was probably the most difficult fight scene there. And they do hint early on what's going to happen with the two characters, and you can kind of already guess from what I've said what it leads into. And I was wondering as it's going on, I was like, did they do it or did they not? Because it kind of faked me out for a moment, then I'm like, oh, they did it. Well, that's a nice little hint to show that that is actually David and not Dan, and not Walter. But he does act differently enough, because he acts like kind of how he did in the first film for David, but like a little bit different to show the character's progression in the decades since the first film. And of course for Walter, completely different. The voice is a lot different. So when they're talking, you can kind of tell who's talking. Except for that part of the end where David becomes Walter. His acting skills at its finest. Now, if you didn't like the character, you're probably not going to like the stuff involving him, but I had no problem with David. He was one of my favorite characters in Prometheus. Now, in conclusion, it is a decent sequel to Prometheus and another decent prequel to Alien. Now, a couple things I mentioned, it will probably turn people off, and like I said, it's going to be just as polarizing as Prometheus, and I think probably even a little more so because of the marketing involving the alien and finding out that it did not come into play until the third act. You mean the trailer lied? I'm probably not going to give it another watch until it hits video and then see if my thoughts are about the same. Like, with Prometheus, they're more or less about the same, so probably might be. Then again, with Prometheus, I had several years to sit on it and then rewatch it. 5 years before seeing the film again. Or is this one, I don't know when I'll see it again. Probably right when it hits video, I'll probably rent it and then give my thoughts on it. Overall, like I said, I thought it was decent. If I were to give it a score now after my first viewing, I'm leaning towards probably a 3 out of 5. Based on what I like about it. Now, not everyone's going to have that same score thing, but it's around there. Maybe it might be 2.5, but I'm leaning more towards 3 because I liked it more than not liking it. I'll say this, though, that if you were to take the basic plot of the film, modify it enough, you could have made this a sequel to Alien and Aliens instead of a prequel. You just, have to drop the whole David thing or make it seem like he's been out in space for years. But yeah, could have made a sequel instead of a prequel, but nope, they had to go the prequel route.